Okay, hi everyone. I'm Keith. I'm the EVolocity technical lead for the North Island, and we've got a few other EVolocity members in the meeting, including Thomas, who's technical lead for the South Island, Sam, who I forgot what your exact role title is actually because it's
Just
changed.
make up a name and then call me that.
Yeah, technical specialist, does everything kind of
Boss.
thing. And then we got Shannon, who is our national coordinator as well. So those are our main. Yeah, we also have Annabelle, and we have Joella, who's a mentor for us as well, and an ex-EVolocity member. So she's seen the scrutineering process kind of from the other end of the stick. Yeah, so I've just put together a short presentation. I think that most of us here have done scrutineering before. Hannah is a new scrutineer for us this year. What has Hannah done before?
Hannah's an ex-EVolocity as well, so...
Okay. So also seen the other end of the stick. Yeah, might know it better than us then. So, yeah, this year we'll start off with why we scrutineer. There are three primary reasons. The first and foremost is the safety of our participants as well as our staff and the people watching. We also do it for education. Scrutineering is a crucial kind of part of the learning process that EVolocity provides. You know, that getting the feedback for your design is super important. And I think scrutineering is actually where a lot of the learning for EVolocity can come from. And then we also do it to ensure fair competition, and that's around those kinds of rules that make sure that no one has an unfair advantage. And it's kind of, I've laid them out in importance here. And yeah, safety is the number one priority, of course. Before you turn up on the day to do scrutineering, you should familiarize yourself with some important resources, and these are primarily our rules document. This is something that you will not have on hand on the day, so it's really important that you read through it before. The WOF Sheet, this is the physical piece of paper that you're going to be working through on the day. And both of these documents can be found under this link, and I'll show you where it is on the website later, so that you know how to get from the homepage to these resources. Then also our EVolocity control unit has some documentation on our website too, and that's something that's relatively new, and we'll touch on it briefly later. When we're doing our scrutineering and in EVolocity in general, we split our competition into classes. So we split it in terms of class for power, as well as the number of wheels present on the vehicle. So for power, we have the standard class, which is where they're bringing a kit that they've been given by EVolocity. It's a standardized kit. These are 350 watts. The vast majority of standard class vehicles are all going to be using the same kit, but there are some exceptions, which was some of these in-hub kits that we provided a little while back, and there's still a few of those floating around. Those have been phased out. We're not providing new ones of those to students, but students are still allowed to enter the standard class with these kits. And this includes everything from the battery to the controller all the way to the motor itself that they use. Then there's also the open class, which is where students bring their own battery and drivetrain, and they can go up to 2,000 watts now. And there's a bit more detail around exactly what that means in the rules. In terms of wheels, we split ourselves bike and kart. Bike is 2 wheels. Sometimes we get unicycles, and we put them under bike as well, but they're relatively rare. And then kart is anything 3 wheels and up. And this is important because generally bikes are much easier to build, and it's much easier to make them light. And so they can have an advantage over karts, especially in that standard class. It's important to touch on our WOF process. So this mainly relates to the day of competition, and the process that we kind of settled on last year, and this is subject to change, so pay attention to your scrutineering briefing in the morning on the day of competition. But basically teams will come and sign in, and they'll be handed a WOF sheet at that point, but they won't have a race number or an ECU or anything like that. The team will then go to a scrutineering bay where you will be standing and waiting for the students, and you will fill out the WOF sheet with them. If there's a fail, they're going to take the WOF with them and go and fix their issue and then come back to you. It's really important that the team keeps track of this WOF sheet. We really shouldn't be issuing more than one WOF sheet to a team. And this just helps to make sure that a team isn't able to kind of get around by going to a different scrutineer with a fresh WOF sheet, and then something gets missed. And they go back to step 2. Ideally back to the same scrutineer, but in theory, the scrutineer has detailed exactly what's wrong, so they should be able to go to any scrutineer to get re-scrutineered. Once a pass is achieved, a team is assigned their race number and their ECU, and they need to install the ECU kind of in front of you. So part of the WOF sheet is making sure that they have set it all up to be able to do this quickly. This is just to make sure that it's installed properly. And last year we had some issues with time management around the ECUs. We were a little bit lenient, and we didn't get our documentation out very early. And so we had to be quite lenient with our teams in terms of preparedness for the ECUs. This year, we're going to take a relatively harsh approach, and that's also where pre-scrutineering is really important, to make sure that they're going to come to the competition on the day with the correct mounting in place and the correct connectors that it can all just plug in and go. Which brings us on to...
just a slight correction on race number. They have assigned themselves been assigned race numbers beforehand and are scheduled to bring them.
Yeah, that's true. So is that all regions that we've done that this year?
Yeah, everyone is responsible for doing it, and we're gathering all the data as well as their class and whether or not they're a bike or a kart at the same time.
Okay, excellent. That makes it even easier for us, so we don't have to physically hand them a race number. You're just going to note that on the WOF sheet along with everything else.
Important to note that even if you tell the teams, there probably will be teams who show up and we may have to give them a race number, but that'll probably be my responsibility on the day anyway. But I guess if you find a vehicle that doesn't have a race number, then come and find an EVolocity team member and we will get one sorted.
Yeah, and then also something that I missed here as well is that we have these little scrutineering pass stickers, and they change from year to year. And so as part of this process, if they get a pass, you're going to give them that sticker, and we retain the WOF sheets, and that's just for our own records. If students want, they can take pictures to make sure that they have their own copy. Pre-scrutineering is what's coming up soon. And basically the idea is that we're going to provide a more relaxed kind of atmosphere and spend more time with the teams. Maybe they get a bit more out of it in terms of feedback, but we have to still stay 100% strict on the rules, because teams quite often get a more relaxed level of scrutiny at these pre-scrutineerings, and then they don't turn up prepared and they might get a small fail or whatever, and it can be quite annoying. So it's really important that we're really clear as to what they would fail on. Quite often you hear on the day at pre-screening, this will be fixed, this will be fixed, this will be fixed. But this is still something that you need to talk through with them and note on the actual sheet. Teams will retain the sheet that they get filled out at pre-scrutineering, and this is mainly just so that they know exactly what to fix. Quite often there's a lot of things to note down, and so where there's a whole area that's unimplemented, make sure that you note on the sheet that you weren't able to check it because it wasn't present or it wasn't done to enough of a standard to even be checked. So that way they don't think that they're just going to pass because of kind of the description of the plan that they gave you. That's quite important, just to make sure that we're super clear on our communication there, that they need to make sure themselves that they bring it up to that standard on the sheet. When we start our WOF sheet, this is the header, and there's certain parts that you'll do first, and then things that you'll do last. I've said second here, this should actually say last, and we've just found out that race number you're going to know from the beginning. So actually, this whole first row and half of the second row you're going to do first, and the ECU number and that overall result, that is the final part of the sheet that you fill in. You should also date and initial this when you circle the P. You can also fail them, of course. Generally, we don't circle that F because we might change it to a P later on. And so basically, once that P is circled and it's been dated and initialed, that's the pass for the team, and that's when the sticker gets handed across. It's also important to pay attention to the status bar here. So you've got passes and fails for each of these, but some rules sections apply to all, and some apply to specific kind of classes or vehicle types. And so you just need to be sure that you're not marking a bike for the kart section, that sort of thing. And then we'll just briefly touch on the EVolocity control unit. This was introduced in 2023, and it acts as an energy monitor. It replaces the energy monitors that we used to use, and all students have received plenty of communication about this. Every team who did competition last year raced with one generally, and yeah, they're pretty simple to mount. There's just some screw holes that they need to leave space for. They can also take them down, use Velcro, zip tie. They have all these different mounting options. They just need a clear piece of space near where their main power line is. And they've got these XT90 connectors that they need to plug into. So their wiring harness should already have these wiring connectors in the correct place, which should be after the fuse, but before anything else, directly after the battery. So it literally goes battery, fuse, ECU, everything else. And that way we can monitor the energy that they're drawing. These units do need to be programmed for each vehicle as part of kind of the scrutineering process, but not really the scrutineering process. And that's probably the part that I'll be handling on the day. So you just need to manage the installation, make sure that it's plugged in the correct order, that the wiring is correct. You've got a plus and minus fairly obvious here as well. And yeah, the students just need a little bit of supervision there. Each EVolocity control unit is also numbered, and that number forms part of the header, and it's really important that this is noted as well, and that if a team needs a swap for the ECU, that this is caught as well. Generally, this wouldn't happen during the scrutineering process, but maybe it would. Yeah, we'll run through the WOF now. So if you wanted to go find the WOF from the home page, you just have to hover over resources, and then the very first link is rules and WOF, and then you can go and download the rules. So I'd recommend that you go and familiarize yourself with these rules before turning up on the day. Like the WOF, this has been updated for 2024, so please go through and have a look at that. And if you have any questions or concerns or things that you feel like weren't clear to you, that's great feedback for us, especially as we try to improve our processes in our documents. So definitely take a look and toss through any comments to us. Same with the WOF. When you're looking at the WOF, if you see things that are a bit unclear or you think should be changed, yeah, pass through that feedback, and we can update that probably for next year. But if it's something relatively significant, we'd even do it for this year. Yeah. So your feedback is definitely valuable there. Now, Shannon has a vehicle behind her, which we can do a quick WOF on as part of this. But for now, is that all clear to anyone? Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, so the first thing that we're going to check is whether the vehicle is a new build or if it's been used in the past. So this is one of the kind of sporting competition regulations that you have to check. Teams really can't score points unless they've done significant modifications or built a new vehicle. You usually ascertain this just by having a conversation with the teams, and those of us who have seen these vehicles before, we will generally also be pulling out teams that are bringing in a modified vehicle just to make sure that the modifications are significant enough. Generally, what we're looking for is medium to large modifications in at least two subsystems. So, for example, steering and drivetrain could be enough, or one major overhaul in one area, like a complete overhaul in the drivetrain, like they've built a new battery and they've completely swapped out the drivetrain and the motor, the motor driver and the motor. Maybe that would be enough as well. Basically, this is just to make things fair for the kids who have built a brand new vehicle this year. And that's generally what we want to encourage, because that's where most of the learning is had. We also are checking for race numbers. So as we've heard tonight, they should be coming with a race number already fitted and ready to go. And so this would be the very first place that you could pull them up. Probably you'd even be able to pull them up on this when you're filling out that header as well. And it just needs to be fairly visible so that when we're doing the timing, we can see exactly which car is passing us. The next section is the chassis and construction. So usually we'd be spending actually quite a bit of our time for the WOF here, where we're looking over the entire chassis and we're ticking off each of these. And so we're looking for the robustness of the chassis, we're looking for the quality of welds and other joining techniques, all of that sort of thing. Please get hands-on with the vehicle, give it a shake, make sure that it's going to hold up to a student driving it around for half an hour continuously. We're also looking at some other safety aspects like the sharp edges, and that students aren't going to be able to come into contact with certain moving parts or the ground. And we're also looking for stability. So this is another thing where we would ideally actually be getting a student to sit in it, and we would be grabbing the top of the roll hoop and kind of giving it a wiggle to kind of get a feeling for the rollover angle for the vehicle. Because we definitely don't want vehicles tipping while they're being driven. Another thing is the seat attachment needs to be pretty sturdy. That brings us to the end of the chassis part. For karts, they have the safety cell section, and this is kind of like an extension of this rule set. So basically, we're looking for the head restraint, which in this case is that back headrest. And you'd see there that potentially that back headrest might not be sufficient unless the student is tall enough that their head is making contact with the back there, with the helmet on as well, of course. In this case, this is an interesting case, and it's a good one to demonstrate on because it has the rear roll hoop, but it doesn't actually have a front roll hoop, and that's part of point 3.2. But you see the front handlebars there on the trike. That is what we would take as the front roll hoop member, as long as it's attached securely enough. And that's got to be both the front and the rear need to be sturdy enough that in a rollover it's going to stop a student from snapping their neck, basically. One that's a little bit difficult to rule on. No, well, actually, it's very clear cut, but it's something that often students will fail on. Is they're going to do all of this work. They're going to come to you, and they might have a perfectly built front and rear roll hoop, but actually, it's too short. And that's where we have this 50mm rule. So a student has got to put on the helmet, sit in the vehicle, and then we basically lay a nice long flat piece of material, ideally a big ruler or something, from the front member to the rear member. So in this case, it would be the front handlebars to the rear roll hoop. And we're looking for a 50mm clearance between their helmet and this ruler at all points. And so this is just making sure that the roll hoop is actually doing what it's designed to. There's a bit of a diagram here which shows it. So this is kind of the line here that joins the front and rear member, and then you've got this 50mm clearance. So it's not uncommon for students to design and build an excellent roll hoop, but it's just a little bit too short. The other one that we're looking at is for lateral triangulation. So as we know, when we have a square, it's going to collapse as the moment that pressure is put onto it. So we need to make everything triangles. And so if we look at this roll hoop here from the back, this is actually one where you would potentially say that, well, there literally is a square there where you've got four angles there instead of three. So theoretically that could collapse, but because we have the cross member there, we would probably say that that's enough there to support it from collapsing that way, especially with the radius on the top of the roll hoop. But if it was just an open member there and it was a square roll hoop, then no, that wouldn't be adequate. They would need to add some cross bracing. And that one's a little bit tricky to get a feel for. We need to just take our time, ask questions if we have any questions, just making sure that in the worst case scenario, a full speed roll hoop, a full speed rollover, that the roll hoop isn't going to collapse. because again, a team can come with a perfectly constructed roll hoop with great materials and it's got the right clearance and everything. But if all of that stress is going through one join, then there's a much greater chance of the roll hoop actually collapsing and the student getting hurt. So those are really important factors to pay attention to. Steering is the next thing that we would take a look at. And actually, you can do these in any order, and often it is advantageous to kind of jump around a little bit, especially at pre-scrutineering, where students might still be getting things ready for you to take a look at, and you've got to move through it relatively quickly. You might jump around a little bit. But for the steering, basically, we can grab it and we can have a little wiggle. We can make sure that it doesn't have free play, that it's all nice and sturdy, and that we're actually able to turn the steering even at standstill. So often vehicles will come with such heavy steering that they need to be rolling to steer. And generally we say that that's actually not a safe condition for an EVolocity vehicle. The second point here is something that's difficult to assess during scrutineering. But it's kind of giving us a point that we can come back to and give someone a fail on their WOF sheet during the event, which is where we see that actually their steering is extremely unstable. And this might be due to a mechanical reason. And this would happen later on during the event. We would come back and give them a fail, and we would remove them from the event until they can correct that. The last point is we're looking for the correct types of fasteners to be used. So we're looking for lock nuts, nylock nuts, or something else that's going to be vibration resistant. A big exception to this is with students who are turning up with pre-built steering components. So whether this comes from a go-kart or from a bike, often these just have large enough fasteners that they don't need these extra safety features. So where it's stock and it's come from a vehicle that's already been built to a standard, like a consumer product of some kind, then you can give them a pass on this, even if they're not nylock. But where it's a completely custom steering mechanism, we're really looking for these nylock nuts or other types of lock nuts. If you're not sure, again, feel free to ask. In terms of brakes, this is one of the checks where we would be getting the student to sit in the vehicle. So we might actually do this check with the cell check. So the student has just checked their height with the roll hoop, and you need to do this for all of the students in the team as well. So where you might have multiple students who would be driving, you need to go back and do that height check for each of them with their helmets on. And basically, you might then move directly to the brakes because the student's in the vehicle already. You want them to press hard on the brakes, and you need to push the vehicle and see if the wheels are locking up. So if they're not able to lock their wheels under braking, then they would fail this check. And this would then be passed on to the head scrutineer to just see if they've got enough braking force. The point 5.2 is similar to point 4.2 in that it's something that you can really only properly check once a vehicle is being driven. And so this is one where, again, we would be able to take a look at a vehicle while it's doing the first events of the day, or even at any point during the day, and pull it up if they fail this point, which is all about the control under braking. For the wheels and tires, these are relatively easy to do. So at this point, you would get the student out of the vehicle again, and you would just be picking up each corner of the vehicle and giving the wheel a spin, making sure that it's nice and centered, that it's balanced enough. Remember that these are homemade vehicles, and that they only need to run for 30 minutes, but we really don't want a stuck bearing or something like that. And we're also looking for tire damage. So generally a tire can be pretty worn out, but if we're seeing any big cracks or chips in the tire, or we're seeing the inner fabric of the tire, then yeah, that's probably not going to be good enough for our event. So we would then pull them up on that as well. And hopefully all of our teams are going to pre-scrutineering, so they would know well in advance when their tires aren't meeting the standard. And so teams won't be turning up to competition with bad tires is the ideal. And so that's why all of these checks are really important to be doing thoroughly at the pre-scrutineering as well, because if they turn up with a bad set of tires on the day of competition, actually there's probably nothing that they can do. And that would be really important, especially for our teams who are traveling hours and hours, and some are even staying overnight to do our competitions. For the chain and drivetrain rule, this is another one that we generally see teams fail on the day, especially those teams who don't turn up to pre-scrutineering. And this is where a team has a vehicle that is chain driven. So not this vehicle here has a in-hub motor, but where they have a chain, we need to make sure that there's no way for someone to get their hand in and touch the running gears and chain system. And this is just another one of our safety features. For powertrain and wiring, basically you're going to be looking over each of these points. They're relatively self-explanatory in terms of the mounting and all of that sort of thing. One thing that, where do we have it? If you look at, I'll actually get to that later, but the being able to dissipate heat appropriately, generally this is not something that standard class vehicles would fail just because they produce so little heat at only 350 watts and being relatively efficient, unless it is an extremely heavy vehicle. So generally, even if they have everything locked up in an airtight box, actually their cooling is going to be fine in the standard class. For open class, it's really important that heat sinks are exposed to the air so that they can cool down while they're running and to make sure that they don't overheat. We're going to be also checking the labels on things if we can to try and see for the power rating of the system. And so for standard class, this is something where actually you would just see, is this kit the standard class kit? If so, you don't have to worry about going and tracking down the label. We've had lots of iterations of the standard class kit over the years, and so you're not really going to be able to catch someone out if they've tried to hide something. And that's something that the EVolocity control unit will be catching. And it's similar for the open class as well. More and more we get interest from students who want to bring a higher power vehicle to EVolocity and then regulate it down. And so that's where the EVolocity control unit helps us to kind of maintain this power. But it's still something good for the scrutineers to pull students up on if there's a deviation, just to make sure that they're aware of how this all works. So basically, if you do find a standard class vehicle with more than 2,000 watts of rated power, I would recommend that you grab the head scrutineer on the day, and they will be able to help you out directly. We're going to be checking the fuse size, and in the rules there is a nice calculation for the fuse size, and they've actually got some examples here. I would definitely recommend you familiarize yourself with these rules before turning up on the day, so that way you know whether a fuse is going to be appropriately sized or not. And it needs to be placed immediately after the batteries. So if a student somehow decided to connect the batteries to the motor driver and then a fuse and then the motor, obviously that's not going to be protecting much. So it's really important that that fuse is there at the batteries to disconnect the whole system if there's a short, is generally what the fuse is there for. The fuse is not for power regulation, it's just for protection against short circuits. The kill switch needs to be mounted after the fuse, and this is another area that generally we've had trouble with in the past in terms of our communications with students as well as our enforcement of it. Shannon, would you be able to locate the kill switch on this vehicle? And we'll see if this one passes. So there it is. That is a nice and beefy kill switch. So this is one that's really big. It's got nice big contacts. It's DC rated. If you were to take it apart, you would be able to see it's DC rated. But and that's the bit with all the keys hanging off of it. But if you look at the bit above that, yeah, so that's the kill switch there. That bit above that is it's a relay. It's more like a thermal overload than a kill switch. And so it's not actually something that's designed to switch a high load while it's running. And so there's actually a chance that if you were to hit that upper thing as the kill switch in a runaway event, that it would actually fuse and would do nothing for you. Would never turn off again, basically. And or not fuse, it would weld itself together. And so that's something that quite often we see teams turning up to competition with as their only kill switch. And this is something that we are trying to correct and improve our communication with teams to ensure that that doesn't happen. There are some nice, cheap kill switches which are suitable for standard class, available on AliExpress and even Trade Me. And we're just trying to get the news out about that. If you see a kill switch and you're not familiar with it, look for a label. You need to look for a DC rating. Quite often, students will turn up with AC rated components which have no stated DC rating, and then it's really difficult to judge whether or not this kill switch is adequate. And so we would generally err on the side of caution in those cases. So it's important to realize the maximum current that you might be required to switch. So assuming that you take the nominal power of the class and the voltage that they're running at, and you just divide them to get that current that you need.
Keith, can I just bring you back to point 8.5? A lot of the time we see students with their fuse between their two standard class 12-volt batteries. What's the go on this?
So this is something that's relatively specific to our standard class kits. And a lot of our kits, I think, come with a fused link between the batteries. From my perspective, this is completely okay as a configuration. Obviously, if there's some sort of... I don't even think that there's a grounding configuration which they could have, which would still leave the vehicle live if that fuse were to blow. But generally what's going to happen is you'll just have both ends completely disconnected from each other, and floating would only really be if, for some reason, the students were running a 12-volt circuit for one half of the battery pack, and then that was grounding the chassis or something. Then you could still have a live voltage in the vehicle. But no, I would say generally don't worry about it. If they've got a fuse kind of inside of the battery that completely disconnects that voltage from being live, then that's just as good as having the fuse after the battery. It's just that in our communications with teams, we are emphasizing having the fuse after the battery. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, if you have any questions on the day or you're not sure, please just grab someone else and we can work through it together. It's super easy. And so I think I've rattled about the kill switch enough. That's one of the more difficult pieces of the scrutineering process. So especially for your first few kill switches, I would probably recommend just you'll have a buddy with you as well, but feel free to go and get feedback from the chief scrutineer on the day as well. The last point is the neatness of the wire run. So if Shannon shows us the wire runs here, you can see that generally they're okay, and this is kind of the standard that we would expect at EVolocity, but we've got a bit of a rat's nest there. So we would probably, more as an education point than anything, to the kids, maybe have a bit of a grumbling and say, "This how could you do this neater?" And then that way, that's one of those things that we can just help students to increase their standard on. What you might have is if particularly onto a team comes back to you, they'll say, we've left all of this extra wiring length just in case something goes wrong and we need to make changes, which is an excellent point. And you will get that every now and again when you pull a team up on having a bunch of extra wiring bunched up like that. There's also point 8.8 I skipped, which is the throttle returning to zero reliably. So this is a really quick and easy test that we can do, which is you literally just give the throttle a few actuations, make sure that it returns home. Okay. Yes, and on 8.9, beyond the wires being neatly run, what we're looking for is potential for shorts to develop. So this would be where through vibrations, wires are rubbing up against an exposed piece of metal that maybe isn't deburred properly, is a little bit sharp. And then that would be a worst case scenario where a short develops in the middle of a race because of chafing. And so that's actually the more important part of that rule 8.9 rather than the aesthetics of the vehicle. So in terms of batteries, you'll notice here this is the second and last place that we kind of have a special section for lithium batteries. So if you aren't sure if a battery is lithium or not, please grab the head scrutineer. All of your standard class vehicles should be using the standardized batteries, and these are our lead acid gel batteries, and these will say what they are on them. In terms of batteries being well ventilated, generally no one's going to be turning up with a sealed battery. And for the open class, they can go into a box, and that's generally fine. Basically, what we're looking for is that a battery can't become a bomb, and that it can build up a bunch of pressure uncontrollably in an uncontrolled manner. There's also concerns about fumes and the like, but this is a secondary concern to the bomb concern. If you're not sure as to whether you kind of feel safe about a battery's design at any point, please again grab the head scrutineer. They can work through that with you. It's important to note that for the open class, they can go up to but not over 60 volts, and they must use one of these kind of battery chemistries. So that's generally your lithium base, your most common lithium based batteries, as well as lead acids. Generally, we say that lead acids are a lot more safe. Then it's lithium ferrous polymer, so lithium ion, and then lithium ion / lipo, especially the nickel metal cobalt, which are the more common forms of the lipo and the lithium ion, are the least safe, and these are the ones that need the most care. That's why we have this extra section of rules for lithium batteries. This is the first year that we're going to be enforcing this quite harshly. And in the past, we have had a little bit more lenience as we've kind of phased these rules in to catch up with what students were bringing to the competitions. But now the teams have had enough notice, and that we are going to be quite harsh, and this is for everyone's safety at the event. So there must be a BMS or battery management system. The cells must be balanced, and there needs to be a low voltage indicator. Teams need to be able to recite all of the statistics of their battery configuration to you off by heart. There needs to be battery temperature monitoring as well, and the driver needs feedback from the battery as well for all of these things like voltages and temperatures to make sure that they can come to a stop in the case that a failure happens. And we're also asking teams to install firewalls that, in the worst case scenario, that a battery does catch on fire, that the driver is given enough time to evacuate the vehicle, and so that they don't get hurt. So it is extremely important that a driver passes all of these. I think that generally we're going to pass any lithium-based vehicles onto the head scrutineer or to permanent EVolocity staff to scrutineer, just because there is an increased risk here. So generally, I think that for everyone else, when you see a lithium-based vehicle, you can do the rest of the sheet, but when you get to the battery section, you're going to want to flag that to the head scrutineer so that they can look after it. If you'd like to know more about our battery rules, there is a whole section where we go further into detail about the lithium-based batteries. It's also really important to note that the rules document supersedes the WOF sheet. This is something that I should have mentioned earlier. The WOF sheet is here for our quick reference, but in every single case, the rules document overrules the WOF sheet, and the word of the chief engineer, and the word of any scrutineer, and including the head scrutineer, overrules all on the day. And generally, we would be just clarifying things that we might miss, rather than inventing rules or giving people passes. Here we're coming to the end of the WOF sheet. It's only 2 pages. And at this point, we would be checking for the energy monitor mounting and connectors. And the team needs to know how to install it. Generally, the easiest way to do this check is you just have a conversation with the team, and you would just say, hey, where are you going to install your energy monitor? And you can eyeball their mounting and their connectors to make sure that they're all present. And the last point is the driver gear, so the PPE for the driver. They need all of the listed PPE there. So make sure that they have that and that they understand that they need to have that. Quite often, teams with multiple drivers will only have one set of PPEs, so when they need to do a driver change, they also need to swap their PPE. and it's really important that that happens. So, for example, it's quite common to have one student do one acceleration run, hand over most of the PPE to the student for the next acceleration run, but they've forgotten the goggles, and then that second student lines up to do that acceleration run, and then they'll have to go back to the back of the line and get those goggles sorted when someone finally notices. So it's really important that we're stressing this to the students, and they generally need to manage this themselves. And if you ever see a student without full PPE driving a vehicle, please pull them up or pull up one of us so that we can correct that, because that is one that can be one that can slip through, especially when a team has been good and then a driver swap happens and they just manage to forget something. Yeah, awesome. So that brings us to the end of the warrant of fitness document, and that's actually everything that I had planned for tonight. So yeah, thanks everyone for coming. And yeah, if you're watching this online and you have any questions, feel free to send them through and we'll address those for you.